Welcome to Student Affairs Live. I'm your host, Tony Doody, and I am pleased to be joining you from my professional home at Rutgers University. We broadcast on the Higher Ed Live network. You can tune in to Student Affairs Live along with my amazing friend and co-host, Heather Shea Gasser, this fall, Wednesdays at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. Be sure to stay with us till the end of the show to hear about the great lineup we have scheduled for the next few months. In a moment, I'll introduce you to our very distinguished guests, but we can't do that without first giving a shout out to the sponsors that make Student Affairs Live possible. Higher Ed Live is sponsored and produced by M. Stoner, a marketing communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. Student Affairs Live is also sponsored by ACPA, College Student Educators International. ACPA's strategic partnership with Higher Ed Live calls attention to the pairing of innovative professional development delivery with the strength of a renowned professional association. ACPA publishes the Journal of College Student Development, to which our guest was an editor back in the day, and About Campus. Big shout out and thanks to Carrie Locke, Rutgers Director of Major Events and Programs, for monitoring today's back channel and sharing ideas from today's episode. Also thanks to Kate Zulo for helping out on the technical side from across campus today. I want to remind everyone that these episodes are really communities of learning, so I've gotten some great messages from people who are actually huddled around a room listening to today's show. A particular shout out to friends and colleagues from Bowling Green University. Your questions and comments on Twitter really make a difference and contribute to the sharing of ideas, so please everyone tweet away. And I know you are all in for a treat today. I have never before met someone so gifted at sharing research and storytelling. Dr. Greg Blimling has been a terrific colleague, a mentor, a former vice president here at Rutgers, former president of ACPA. He won a national award from NASPA for outstanding contribution to literature and research. And he tells me he was also a fiercely competitive racquetball player back in the day. Greg has had a major impact on the field of student affairs over the course of his career, and I feel fortunate to spend some time with him here today before he rides off into the sunset of retirement at the end of this academic year. So Greg, can we start us off by describing your current role, what you're doing these days, and also share with us your best and worst memory from your undergraduate days when you lived in a residence hall?
Hi, Tony. Thank you for inviting me to be part of your show. I've seen parts of it before, and it really is a great addition to what we do in higher education.
Thank you.
So I currently work at the Rutgers Graduate School of Education, where I'm a professor, and I teach in the College Student Affairs and Higher Education program here. So you want my best and worst experiences from college?
Yeah.
Well, I lived in residence halls at Indiana University. I started in 1968, and I lived in the college residence halls as an undergraduate for only 1 year. But in that year, I met a bunch of guys from the floor that we ended up getting an apartment off campus, and we lived together for the next 3 years as undergraduates at the university. And it was an eclectic group. I lived with an Asian American student, an African American student, and a student who was born in Yugoslavia and came from a strong Yugoslavian background. We lived together for 3 years, and that in and of itself was quite educational. My worst experience was probably the amount of time I spent socializing in my first year in school. I went to class, but not as often as I should have. I did all right academically because I guessed well on tests, but I spent far too much time socializing, probably not enough time as a serious student in my first year.
Great. So most people, lots of people in the field have read your book, The Resident Assistant. So my question is, what was your inspiration for this book, and how is it different from some of your other books, your past writing?
Well, I've always been interested in college residence halls, and one of the reasons I've been so interested in them is that it's one of those experiences that are available to student affairs in which we can have a rather dramatic impact on a very large number of students at one time. There are many other ways in which we have impact through clubs, organization activities, student government, advising, etc. But it's a much more refined group of people. And in college residence hall, you have the widest impact, and you also tend to have it in the first 2 years, where most of the students will live in a residence hall in their first and second year, at least on a residential campus they are. And what goes on in the residence halls in terms of the social dynamics going on between people and the opportunities to build programs and the diversity of experiences they have really is a rich area of learning for students, and it's always been an interest of mine.
Great. So I got quite a few emails and tweets actually this morning from folks asking me to make sure you cover this one question. And the question is this age-old question of why student affairs professionals call traditional student housing, or we should be calling them residence halls, as opposed to dorms.
So there are actually dorms, and the term dorm comes from the word domus pauperum, which basically means endowed hostels. And it was a term that was used in the early history of Cambridge and Oxford to describe where students lived. And they literally lived in dorms, which were usually a room much like an old army barracks, in which students would live, and they would just congregate there primarily for the purpose of sleeping. And there are fraternities that still have dorm rooms where they're basically go and sleep. They're sleeping rooms. But since development in the United States, usually around the mid-1800s, early 1900s, the whole concept of having a dormitory changed. The idea was that dormitories are not places people sleep. They're places where people live. And you look at a college residence hall today, and there's so much more that goes on than sleeping. I mean, this is an opportunity for learning. There are classes going on. There are all kinds of student interactions. There are clubs being formed. There's intramural activities taking place. It's a place where a lot of student learning takes place. And that's why we refer to them as residence halls as opposed to dorms, because they're quite literally not dorms.
Great. So I know you could probably do a whole show on the history of residence halls, and maybe that will be your next book. But you dedicated a whole chapter, I believe. And I really want to focus in on the topic of learning today for the majority of the episode, but I do want to point out to viewers that the book does a really good job of moving us through the evolution and history of res halls over time. So let's move on to the main focus of the book. You make this great analogy, and I'm totally going to borrow this for my future presentations with attribution, of course, as it relates to residence life and roller coasters. To illustrate student learning. Can you share that example?
Well, one of the things that makes residence hall so powerful is it's an experientially based program. It involves all kinds of things that happen. And I think the analogy that I've used is you can talk about what happens in a college residence hall, and I can do a lecture on what happens in a college residence hall. I can bring people in and show them a college residence hall. But until you actually live and experience it on a day-to-day basis, you don't get the full impact. And the same would be true with a roller coaster. So if you think about it, in a roller coaster, for example, you could do a lecture on a roller coaster, you could watch other people on a roller coaster, but once you're on the roller coaster, you experience the excitement. You experience the ups and the downs and the wind in your face, and that involves all of your senses. And it's a totally involving experiential program. And that's what is important for learning. Albert Einstein once said that experience is learning, all else is information. And to a large extent, that is absolutely true. You think about those things that have had the greatest impact and that people remember for a long period of time, and they're experientially based. In fact, when we go back and we ask alumni, what are the things you remember most about college? What they tell us are the experiences they had with other people, the experiences that they had in the fraternity, the experiences they had in the residence hall, the experiences in student government. Very few sit up and say, you know, I had a great German class, and I just really remember how great that German professor was. It's morally about the quality of the interaction with people. The other side of that is also relates to this issue of people are interactive. So it's not like reading a book, but there's this interaction, so you get feedback about what's going on, and that becomes reinforcing in terms of your learning experience.
Good. So you write about the studies that attempt to demonstrate that living, or many studies have attempted to demonstrate that living in a conventional residence hall compared with living at home or commuting to campus increase academic performance of students. However, you say that there's really little evidence that supports this conclusion, and this shouldn't be a surprise. Why is that?
Well, living in a residence hall doesn't make you smarter. There's nothing about that experience that automatically makes you more intelligent or perform better academically. Can you construct programs in residence halls that lead to better academic performance? You can. But in a traditionally conventional residence hall, which represents the majority of the experiences students have, merely living there does not do it. The first person to point this out was actually Arthur Chickering in a book he wrote in about 1978, 79, someplace in there, called Commuting versus Residence Halls Students. And he looked at what the differences were. Since then, there's been a number of other studies, and the bottom line on this is that it is true that students in college residence halls perform better academically, but not after you control for things like pass SAT scores, grade point average, and so forth. The reason that they perform better, just on the whole, is that they tend to come from wealthier families, and they can devote most of their time to their academic experience, where students who live at home generally come from lower socioeconomic issues and don't have as much support to do those things. So once you factor out the grade issues, there really is no difference between the academic performance of living at home and living in on college residence halls. But residence halls aren't really designed to make you smarter. Residence halls are designed to develop other attributes in an individual, things such as social skills and the ability to be able to work with others and negotiating skills and a whole bunch of other kinds of things.
You mentioned Chickering, and one of the questions sent in from Tyler Conlon from Bowling Green State University is, what's the most valuable lesson you've learned in your career in the application of student development theory related to residence halls?
Well, there have been many things that I've learned. First of all, I guess I've learned that students need to be part of the decision-making in the buildings. This is an experience that needs to be a community-based experience rather than a top-down experience. And the most successful things that happened are those things in which the students initiated themselves, in which they got support to achieve things in the building. A second thing I learned is that there's no substitute for personal interaction with students. I was a hall director at Bowling Green State University back many, many years ago. I think it was like 1976 in Anderson Hall, which at the time had about 350 male students that lived there. And I used to go out every evening and literally walk the floors just to meet the students in the building. I would stop into any room door that was open and spend a few minutes chatting with somebody. And the RAs in the building, part of their assignment was to check on every person on their floor every week, to make sure they made contact every week. It was just to stop in and say, how's it going? And so by the end of the year, I think I knew just about everybody in the building, and they certainly knew who I was. And I found that those personal interactions that I had with people, the trust that was built up, the fact we knew one another, I knew something about them, were tremendously helpful in terms of my interaction with students and moving things forward in that building.
Great. So in your book, you give two separate scenarios describing different social environments, and you explain that one of these social systems is likely to create a positive educational experience for students, whereas the other one has less chance to do so. Would you mind walking us through these two scenarios?
So there's been some research that deals with what makes effective RAs and what makes effective staffs in those buildings, residence life staff. And what they've looked at are, in part, the motivations for participation. And with the RAs, they went and asked them, why did you want to become an RA? And the three answers that they found most frequently were to help other people, because I want to learn and become a member of an organization or team, and fourth, because I think I can bring control and order to what is sometimes chaotic. When we go and we look at who's most effective in terms of the RA, and this also applies to residence life staff, the people that are the least effective are those that are focused on enforcing rules, regulations, and trying to control the lives of students. What they find is two things. First of all, that the students remove themselves from contact with them and they don't have that personal interaction. And secondly, when something happens and they, quote, catch a student doing something, they really expect something draconian to happen to the student, and normally speaking, universities don't do that, nor should they. The second group of people that were least effective were those people that joined the staff because they were looking to get something for themselves out of it. In other words, they joined, wanted to become RAs so that they could learn things and become a member of the team and be part of that whole experience. The people that were most effective, honestly, were those people that joined who had the most altruistic goals. They were interested in helping other people and thought they had something to contribute, that put other people's needs and interests above their own, and that were really truly interested in connecting with other students and making them more successful and better. And so when you take a look at residence halls, you can run residence halls as hotels, highly structured, a lot of rules enforced, everybody following the policies. And what will basically happen is students will retreat into their rooms, they will form organizations, and they will see the staff as alienated from the day-to-day student lives. Or you can engage the students, be part of the community, treat them fairly, work to make them successful, and become part of that community. And that is more educational and successful experience for a college residence hall.
So another question from our colleagues over at Bowling State University, it is from Michael Zangel, and he asks, what has been your most effective method in fostering faculty buy-in in regards to residential learning? How do we sell them on the value?
Well, faculty buy-in is very difficult, and there are two factors at work here. One is the kind of institution you attend. There's two kinds of faculty in higher education, what we call cosmopolitan faculty and local faculty. So cosmopolitan faculty are those faculty that are really involved more in their field of expertise, like biology or history or philosophy, and they can do their work at basically any institution in the country and have very little institutional loyalty. So they could just as easily work at Rutgers as they do at Indiana University as they do at Ohio State. For them, it's the same thing. Then you have local faculty that are truly engaged in the life of the campus. They see themselves as teachers and as educators and are involved in trying to make that campus experience better. You find that more often at less research-oriented institutions, liberal arts colleges, for example, those kind of institutions. Your best shot of getting people involved is getting local faculty involved. And the way you get them involved is you find some way to connect them to the daily life of students. And the ways I found to be most successful have been put their offices in the building. And I know that's hard to do. When I was at Appalachian State University as Vice Chancellor for Student Development there, we built a Living and Learning Center, and as part of that Living and Learning Center, we put in the faculty for the interdisciplinary studies programs and classrooms, and organized activities in which they were involved. And it wasn't always activities related to academic things. They were things like going on hikes together. They were things like participating in a softball game with the students. It was doing those kind of interactive things. We gave them meal passes so that they could have lunch and dinner with the students. And what would happen is, because they knew them, the faculty would actually go out of their way and sit down and chat with students. And those informal communications with students are some of the most powerful the students have.
So related to that, I want to talk for a moment about the concept of community. And you wrote that if you ask any university president what makes a university great, the president's likely to tell you that it's the quality of the faculty. However, we know that what really, now I'm quoting you, what we really retain students at a university is the quality of student life. And you go on to cite Vincent Tinto and Elaine Eschbau, saying that students who fail to connect with others in their living units often feel isolated and are at increased risk of leaving college. So relative to this concept of community, what are some intentional strategies that our viewers might consider when attempting to build community?
Well, let me back up just 1 second and say that there are basically three things that will determine a student's success in college: family background, their peer relationships, and faculty. Of those three things, the most important factor that determines a student's success or failure in college is family background. All the things that happen to the students, the expectations, the support he or she receives before they get here, and also why they're here in terms of the faculty or the parents encouraging them to stay here. It's why first-generation college students sometimes struggle more than second or third-generation college students do. Once students arrive on campus, the most powerful thing that happens is not what the faculty do, it's what the students do. Who a student's friends are have more control over whether a student is going to be successful or not than anything the faculty does. And it's because the student culture engages them in a way that connects them to the larger campus community. The residence hall experience is one of the main ways that happens, and it happens through such things as proximity. It happens through issues related to how frequently people interact. It has to do with this kind of informal social interaction that takes place. When you come back from class, what you do, what you learn from other people. And because people are interactive, they learn and experience, you get feedback of what's going on in your life, and it becomes an extremely powerful way of learning. Now, it becomes particularly powerful during this age period, 18 to, say, 20 years old, when we know that the prefrontal cortex in students is still under development. And it's particularly important then because they are trying to associate with and connect with peers to give them feedback about who they are and what they want to become. Eric Erickson pointed out many years ago, and Chick Grant, of course, followed up on this, as has many other developmental people, that the major goal in the college years is self-discovery. It's about identity. Who am I? And one of the ways in which students define that initially is by what their peers say about them, and their peer interactions define a lot of that. So that's the ways you define community on a floor. There are some structural things you can do. There are things to define territory, for example. We know that if the group is too large, the group will not form community. There is something referred to as the Dunbar number. The Dunbar number is the number of associations a person can maintain and still have a community. That number is about 150. So residence hall directors that are running buildings to, say, 500 have little or no chance of developing community within the building. The focus of community needs to be on the floor, and it needs to be in groups of 10 to 20 people at the maximum. And therefore, you can really do it. The kinds of things that form the community are the frequency of interaction and commonly shared experiences, things in which unite them. So things that, playing basketball together, going on trips together, going to football games together, having a party together, sharing things that other people outside the group don't. Because those experiences define the group itself and become self-reinforcing in terms of membership in the group. And that's how communities get formed. They usually take about 2 to 3 weeks to really get set in the residence halls, and after that, the associations begin to click. And they often click around where your room is located on the floor. And the reason for that has to do with frequency of interaction and proximity. Other things that contribute are things such as commonly shared values. So, for example, if you all participate in the same church organization, that would tend to reinforce those things. And homogeneity of past experiences. So, for example, if there's 3 or 4 Hispanic students on the floor, they may find that they automatically connect because of their common heritage.
Wow, who knew? So much science behind building community. Love it. So we got a question from one of your colleagues, a past president of ACPA, Heidi Levine.
Oh, hi, Heidi.
So I'm going to jump ahead to a question we had later. She wants to know how are interactions changing and student learning changing as interactions become more virtual. And you ended your book with a chapter on the future of residence halls. So given the rise in online education and in particular MOOCs, is the resident hall in jeopardy of going the way of the dodo bird? I mean, is it possible that residence halls will remain and classrooms disappear as classes take place from the comfort of residence halls or rooms, and how does that impact student learning?
Well, I think I may have said in the book, and I've said elsewhere, that students don't go to college to attend classes. They go to college because they want to attend college. And college is more than just that classroom experience. So you take a look at MOOCs, for example. MOOCs may have a role, and as does online education. In higher education, I think it's very effective for students who may find it difficult to schedule the time necessary to go to classes, or students who may have a mobility impairment that doesn't allow them sometimes to attend certain classes, or students that may not have the social skills because of a limiting factor in their life and are uncomfortable in those situations. I think all of those students can benefit from distance learning and perhaps the MOOCs that are online. But right now, MOOCs don't have a way to make any money, and if it doesn't have a way to make money, it's not going to survive very long. Students want the residential experience because the residential experience is the college experience. It's about connecting with other people. It's about learning from other people. It's about that whole experiential form that they don't get online. And the other side of it is, at the age of 18, most parents want their sons and daughters to go to college. They want them, not to be unkind about this, but they want them out of the house. They don't want them around the house and hanging out and doing things. They want them engaged with other people. And in our society, we have this idealized concept of what that experience is and how they're going to learn and interact and have connection with other people, and that's part of that college experience. So no, I think if anything, that we'll find that the classroom experience shrinks. Even on our campus right now, we have a number of hybrid courses in which one week you're online with your students, and the next week, for example, you might be in class with them. That's very common. The other thing about the distance learning courses particularly is most students enrolled in the distance learning courses are students that are currently enrolled and living on campus, or at least attending the main campus. It's not the people actually that are in their homes that are taking the courses. It's mostly the students that are currently enrolled, and what they do is they do the online class because it works better into the schedule, or they prefer online classes for that particular issue, or the section they wanted to attend was filled, a number of other issues. But that's where most of the distance learning and online classes are happening. And is it possible that in the future the residence halls will become the major learning opportunity for what happens, where there'll be very sophisticated kind of computers and maybe 3D dimensional kinds of things that are available in the residence halls, and that will become the classrooms? Absolutely. In fact, it's already happening in some places.
Wow, cool. You write that in 2008, Creamer and Levy studied the peer effects of randomly assigned roommates on alcohol use and academic performance. And they found that on average, males who had roommates who reported drinking in high school received 1/4 point lower GPA, grade point average, than those assigned to non-drinking roommates in the first year of college. So should we be trying to segregate students by offering substance-free residence hall, and is that even possible in practical terms?
So from those institutions that have first-year residence halls, freshman residence halls, almost all those are supposed to be substance-free because the drinking age in every state is 21. And so in theory, they all should be substance-free. I don't like the idea of designating kind of substance-free and substance-using residence halls. That kind of never made sense to me. I, in fact, think that students need to learn to interact with students that are drinking too much, as well as students that aren't drinking at all, and this is part of the social learning experience that goes on in the residence halls. And they have to learn to navigate those things. It's a challenge. It's an experience. They need to talk through it. They need to wrestle with the issues. Why is it happening? It probably has to do with the social opportunities that are available. So we know from the research in college residence halls that students are much more likely to drink if when they enter the room, other people in the room are drinking. We know this from research they've done on suites, for example, or apartments. And the reason for that is based on Kurt Lewin's old theory, and that is behavior is a function of the person and the environment. So if you go in and the environment is such that it's defined by social interaction, people relaxing, having a beer, or maybe smoking marijuana, there is a tendency then to be part of that group for you to join that same social experience. And therefore, if your roommate drinks frequently, there's a greater likelihood that you're going to start drinking, or that you will drink more often than you normally would have.
So I'm not ashamed to admit that I had a serious addiction in college. That's right, I'm going to bare my soul out here on international web space, on the intranets. Yes, I had an addiction to video games, Greg. And you share...
This doesn't surprise me yet.
Now, you share a 2008 study by Seinbrickner and Seinbrickner that found that students whose roommates brought video games with them to residence halls received lower grades than students whose roommates did not have video games. And he attributed the grade decline to a reduction in study effort that accompanied the amount of time the students spent gaming. Are there other factors, traits, behaviors that have this negative correlation, a negative effect on roommates?
Well, yeah, I mean, clearly things like drinking, use of marijuana are two other factors that relate to it. You have to remember that at the age of 18 and 19, the time management skills of students are not quite as developed as they will be later in their life. This issue of perseverance is not really fully developed at the ages of 18 and 19. And there's a tendency for impulsive actions and impulsive decision making. And remember, peer pressure is extremely important at this time. So given the choice of sitting around playing video games or smoking marijuana or doing any number of other things or studying, it's pretty easy for people to give in to the temptation and do that and become poor time managers. And what we know about good academic performance is there's no substitute for time on task. By the same token, if you can set up a scenario where everybody is in fact in the building studying, it also has a positive effect. So you take a look at honors programs, for example, honors residence halls. The competition in honors residence halls is such that when students go back, there is a higher likelihood the students will be engaged in something academic. They'll be studying. And if you go in your roommate studying and everybody down the floor studying, it sets the behavioral expectation that you too should be studying. Engineering buildings, for example, where there is a high demand for academic performance and a lot of focused, concentrated programs particularly in the first 2 years, students study like more than 30 hours a week. And if you go into one of the residence halls for engineering students, you'll find the students are really engaged in focused study. And that has to do with meeting peer expectations and the idea that the behavior occurring is setting the expectation for other behavior.
I'm going to take a few moments to share a few excerpts from your research relative to diversity, and I got a question for you. So you write, Cripps and Turner in 2011 argue that experiencing social cultural diversity challenges stereotypes and has a long-term positive consequence on cognitive processes that positively influence other domains of thinking and reasoning. A 2012 Stanford study by Mark and Harris and a separate study by Tyson in 2005 at Duke found that students who had interracial roommates developed more interracial friends than students who were assigned roommates of the same race. And lastly, in a 3-year longitudinal study at 23 colleges, Pasquarella found that diversity experiences in the first year of college had a significant positive effect on critical thinking. And he also observed that students benefit from exposure to many forms of diversity, including racial, ethnic, cultural, religious, and political diversity. So my question, and there was lots more research there in the book, given the individual learning benefits and the potential societal good, should we intentionally be assigning roommates based on these many forms of diversity? So, in other words, assign roommates on the basis of race? All aspects, all dimensions of diversity. So, a couple things let me say about that. First of all, one of the reasons that diversity is so important is that it doesn't allow students to suffer the delusion that their way of viewing the world is in fact the only one out there. It challenges their ideas and they have to defend their way of thinking. It also informs their judgment. Many of the interactions students have with people that are outside of their home environment are based upon stereotypes they have about various groups or based upon what other people have told them unless they've had previous interaction with them. And so when you live in a college residence hall, what happens is those stereotypes are challenged and it forces you to reevaluate. You have interactions with people that you thought were going to be negative and turned out to be really positive. I'll give you one example here. When I was vice president for student affairs here, I used to meet with the student leaders every Wednesday night for dinner at the faculty club. And there's about 25 student leaders I invited to dinners on Wednesday nights, and we used them as kind of a sounding board for various policies and programs we had. And the director of Housing and Residence Life came forward with what appeared to be a very good idea, and that was to assign roommates in the residence halls using a system that was similar to Facebook. And what would happen is students would go online, look at the options that were out there, and pick somebody so they would have a roommate that they felt comfortable with coming to school in the fall semester. Because our goal at that time was really to increase roommate satisfaction. And if you want to know the truth, roommate satisfaction is directly related to selecting your own roommates. The best way that people to select their own roommates generally have the highest level of student satisfaction with their roommate. So we took this idea to the students, and
you know this, Tony, but some other people may not. Rutgers is a very diverse institution. We do not have a racial majority on campus at this time. So we took this to the students, and the students, we thought they would say, this is a great idea. And they said, this is a really bad idea. And we were kind of shocked. We said, why? And they said, because the best learning experiences they had were from students that were very much not like themselves. And they said, if you allow students to pick their own roommates, what they're going to do is pick people that are just like themselves. And they'll miss out on that diversity experience, which they reported was among the most valuable experiences they had here at Rutgers. And we didn't implement the policy, and we thought to ourselves, you know, we need to listen to our students, and they were absolutely right. So the problem with doing this assigning by race is, first of all, there's some probably legal complicating issues about whether or not we could actually do that. But there is a couple other things. If you come to a school like Rutgers, which is highly diverse, or to a school like UCLA, which is highly diverse, or Berkeley, which is highly diverse, you're going to find that just the random assignment of students in various buildings is going to tend to link to a fairly diverse community, just on a random basis. But if you go to a school like I worked at previously, Appalachian State University, which is a wonderful school with absolutely wonderful students, but only 5% of the students were students of color. And it's just not possible with 5% of the students of color and 95% of the people coming in being white to really get that kind of racial diversity that would make sense. So the racial diversity in the residence halls has to be really a reflection of who the students are attending the institution. So it's a larger global question for it to work.
So switching gears a little bit related to the topic, we have a few questions related to socioeconomic status. And you mentioned this in the book, that we should offer this range, this menu of options for our students. But Ricky Meinke, I believe, who is a grad student at Louisiana State University. Did you work at? Were you a student?
I did.
I was. Right?
No, I was dean of students there. That's right.
Okay, so
Great school. I love LSU.
He asked, can the higher price resident hall serve to, in effect, separate students based on socioeconomic status and eventually ethnicity?
That's an excellent observation on his part, and to the extent that there are different costs to the residence halls, that is one of the fears that I think is inherent in the process, is that students, what will happen is that this would be a socioeconomic segregation of students. The students from the wealthiest families will go to the most expensive residence halls, and those students from the least economically advantaged families will end up in the least expensive residence halls, and that what you end up doing is segregating that way. Can it happen? Yeah, it can happen. We did a study here. We have a fairly large population that comes in under what's called the Equal Opportunity Program, and these are students who are economically stressed and come from very poor families. All of them are Pell Grant recipients. And we assumed that they would select residence halls based on what the various costs were. What we found was that it didn't happen. What in fact did happen was that most of them gravitated towards the most expensive residence halls. I'm not sure why that's the case, except that that's what the data showed. We can surmise there may be some reasons about feeling a sense of accomplishment and having money paid for by the university and having sufficient financial aid to do that. That's what we assumed was part of the case. But it can happen. I think it's something, if the university does have that segregated kind of housing where there's a great difference between one cost and another cost, that it's something that they ought to review periodically to see if it's creating a problem. If it is, they ought to find some way to intervene in that process.
So given resources, you suggest that housing and residence life give options, choices, much like we give options about what classes to take to meet degree requirements. Is this also true for first-year students? Would you recommend that?
Yeah. So I think that there ought to be a rule, and there isn't many institutions, that first-year students live in college residence halls. There should be exceptions to that. I mean, clearly, you know, if you live within the same community where the institution is, or you need to live at home and commute to campus, or you're married or single parent, or a number of other things, a veteran, there ought to be exceptions. But generally speaking, the advantages that students need to get a college education really are so important in that first year. The first year in the college residence hall is what really brings students in and attaches them to the institution and makes them feel connected to the institution by being connected with their peers. In many ways, redefines their identity as a college student. It also separates them in some ways from their old friends and old associations. They become Facebook friends as opposed to controlling their daily lives and the daily interactions. What you really want them to do is invest in the institution. And the daily interaction and the expectations and the conversations and the discussions are what does that in the residence halls in a very informal way. Now tell me the rest of the question again, Tony. I've gone off here on a tangent.
So should first-year students be able to live in an apartment? Essentially, is the question.
There is research on this, and they should not be able to live in an apartment because what we want to do is we want to limit students' privacy in the first year of college so that they have that interaction with everybody else. They want to be able to go out and sit in the lounge and talk with other people. They want to be part of that community experience, hopefully with their doors open where other people pop in and they do things together. If you have what's called a junior suite situation, which tends to close students off more, or you have an apartment, you know 2 or 3 other people, and apartments tend to isolate students, and that's not what you need in the first year. Students need different kinds of housing at different stages in their education. First-year students really need fairly traditional residence halls. That doesn't mean you can't have a shared bathroom between rooms, but it does mean that putting them in an apartment is a big mistake. I also would not give single rooms to first-year students except for those students who have a special disability need to have one. And the reason for that is it isolates them too much. There have been some examples over the years in which universities have structured residence halls in such a way that they want to put first-year students all in single rooms. And when they did that, suicide rates in those buildings were much, much higher than any other place on campus. In fact, institutions that tried that have basically abandoned it. They need that traditional college experience where you connect with other students, you learn from those other students, and you become part of the community of college students, which invites you to stay and become more and more involved. It's an issue of engagement, and there's nothing more engaging in terms of a student's life than the day-to-day life of living in a residence hall.
Now we've got so many grad students on today's that clear from the Twitter feed and the emails watching today. Now, so I want to jump ahead to a question later that I had slated here. You shared that as many as 60% of all new student affairs professionals leave the field within the first 5 years after completion of the master's degree. Why is that, and what can senior level administrators, particularly in residence life, do to stop this attrition? Or do we not? Do we want to stop this attrition?
Well, historically that has been the case, where there's a lot of people that enter student affairs that leave. And there's a number of reasons that account for this. First of all, most people that enter student affairs enter into the field of residence life work, and that's because that's where most of the jobs are. And if you look at how the residence life programs are structured, it's a fairly sharp pyramid. So you might have on campus 10, 15, 20 residence hall directors, but then you might only have, say, 4 or 5 area coordinators and even fewer number of assistant directors. So what happens is that that field narrows very quickly. The second thing is, particularly in residence life, there's a tendency for the job itself to isolate students, and it can become unfulfilling. Unlike working for something like career development or financial aid or student activities or whatever, residence life work, people that are running residence halls as resident directors and area coordinators are usually out in the residence halls essentially by themselves. Their interactions with RAs, their interactions with maybe some other hall directors from time to time, but they're pretty much off into a building by themselves, not connected from other student affairs professionals, and in that way they can feel rather isolated and removed from what's going on. It's also, by the way, one of the reasons why the residence life folks are those that are most involved in professional associations and organizations, because they feel an attachment to the association and the organization of other residence life professionals, equal to and sometimes more so than the other student affairs people on their campus with whom they may not have much interaction at all. So that's one of the contributing factors. There's some other things that go on. Most people have their first job for about 5 years. That's true based on age. We know that after 5 years, people change the job. There's some developmental reasons why that happens. So there is a change in jobs that go on. There's also a higher percentage of women that enter in student affairs, and women sometimes, our society, they choose to leave the profession for at least a period of time, sometimes to start a family, sometimes for other reasons, and they tend to leave in higher numbers than males do. That probably has to do with, and that may be changing, but it probably has to do with social expectations about women's roles and men's roles, which obviously are evolving over time.
So, looking at the research, what would you consider to be the number one variable in predicting student satisfaction in residence halls?
Well, when you do sort of a meta-analysis of the data on this and take a look at what are called effect sizes, and effect sizes are the differences, it basically shows the magnitude of a treatment. What we find is that the most important variable that determines a student's overall satisfaction with a residence hall is how new the residence hall is. So if it's a brand new building that has a lot of whistles and bells and is clean and well maintained and has some kind of status attached to it, students are generally very satisfied in those buildings. So that tends to be the major proponent. Following that, it relates to the quality of the social interaction within the building. But often those new buildings that are being built are apartments, and so there's also this transition becoming increasingly autonomous. In the first 2 years, students are still in the first year, students are working on the break in the parent-child relationship, and autonomy is very important. And being in a residence hall automatically has a limiting factor because there's RAs there and there's staff there, and they don't feel like they can be as autonomous and as independent as they want. That is, in fact, the big draw to move them off campus. The way we have dealt with that has to give them greater freedom through apartments on campus, in which they do have greater autonomy and can do more, and they learn a different set of lessons there, but not at the first year. It needs to be a junior and senior experience, not a freshman sophomore experience.
So are there specific features of the physical environment? I mean, if people are working on new construction or they're upgrading their buildings, what are some of the features that contribute to this?
So it depends what you're trying to achieve with the residence hall. When I was vice president here, we built a number of residence halls. One of them we built was for students in the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math. And we designed the buildings in a community where no building was larger than 150, and we designed it in such a way where the floors were segmented into groups of 10 on each end of the floor, so there were about 20 rooms per floor. And we put the RAs in the middle and the lounges in the middle, but segmented off so there was a sense of territory and connectedness in the building. We also then put common space on the building, such as kitchens and other things on the floor that allowed students to interact in a different way. But students could know all the students in the building, and there were special programs set up to kind of reinforce and connect students. That was a great experience, and it has been a very positive experience for first and second year students. There's a lot of informal tutoring that take place, where in things like pharmacy and engineering, which are heavy science course-related issues, and students are doing really well academically in that building, and there's a high level of satisfaction. We also put some apartments in the building for students who had been there for a long time and wanted to stay and serve as models